Let's now get to our top story. The U.S. says it will not defend Kurdish-led SDF forces from Turkish attacks in northern Syria. Pentagon officials say U.S. forces have evacuated 2 observation posts in Syria along the Turkish border. In a statement, the White House said Ankara will now be responsible for all ISIS fighters captured in the area in the last 2 years. It said having defeated the so-called ISIS caliphate, U.S. forces will no longer be in the immediate area. Meanwhile, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said Ankara is determined to clear the border region of terrorists and to ensure Turkey's security. The SDF said the withdrawal is a breach of commitments by the U.S. that will have an extremely negative impact on the war against ISIS. These developments come hours after a phone call between President Erdogan and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump. Earlier, Russian President Putin announced an end of conflict operations in Syria and called for a political solution. Well, let's firstly go to Moscow, where we're joined now by our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thanks for joining us. Now, President Erdogan, Ross, as you well know, regularly interacts with President Putin of Russia. Now, as a key military and diplomatic ally of the Syrian government, how would Moscow view a Turkish incursion?
This actually might play positively for Moscow if this goes ahead, this Turkish incursion into northeastern Syria. One thing that Moscow has said is that Kurdish rights must be respected, but that respect must come under a single state. So Russia wants to see the return to Syrian control by Damascus, President Bashar al-Assad, of all of Syria. The territorial integrity of Syria as it was in 2011, before the start of the civil war, must be returned to government control, and that would include the Kurdish-controlled areas in northeastern Syria, respecting the rights of Kurdish people in that area, but that they must accept that the Syrian government will eventually have control of those Kurdish-run areas. Moscow has been readying itself for a possible mediation role when it comes to this. Now, the Kurds may see themselves abandoned, perhaps, by the US on one hand, if the US is going to step aside, not stand in the way of any possible Turkish incursion. The Kurds then may look to Moscow for more support, saying, well, can you help us? Could you guarantee our security? Moscow, of course, would say, well, if we can, it's going to be coming through the control of the Syrian government. So obviously, as you said, Russia is a major backer of the Assad regime, and Turkey supports the anti-Assad regime, but they have been working together also, as you mentioned, on other projects.
Indeed. So just briefly, if you can, before we let you, so what impact would this Turkish military action have on the Astana political process?
Well, one issue that the Russian and Turkish presidents seem to have overcome is the fact that, as I mentioned, they support different sides in the conflict. And over the several years where we've had Russia supporting the Assad regime and Turkey supporting those anti-government rebels, that hasn't totally impacted on their cooperation, along with Iran, in the Astana framework. We've seen regular commitments and regular meetings in Turkey, Russia, to try to guarantee this framework will work as they try to build towards possible peace negotiations for the end of the deal, for the end of the war. Some kind of peace deal may come out of this. So that doesn't seem to have impacted on the Putin-Erdogan working relationship. There's problems on the ground in Syria, if you like, hasn't impacted their relationship so far. So it doesn't seem to be under particular threat at the moment, that Putin-Erdogan friendship.
Very well, Ross. We appreciate your reporting for us there from Moscow. Ross Cullen speaking to us there live. Now let's go to Turkey, where we're joined now by Ahmed Alioğlu, who is a political analyst. Ahmed, thank you for your time today and for joining us here at Indus News. Ahmed, Turkish forces have also been conducting operations, as you well know, against PKK militants in northern Iraq. Now, how much of a temptation is it for Turkey, do you think, to outflank Kurds in both countries, i.e. Iraq and Syria?
It must be clear that Turkey is not conducting any operation against the Kurdish people. It is basically against the PKK and its offshoot, the YPG and the SDF in Syria. So Turkey doesn't have any problem with the Kurdish population in the region, whether in Turkey, in Iraq, in Syria, or anywhere. There are lots of ministers in the cabinet in Turkey who are Kurdish. There are lots of the members of the ruling AK party who are Kurdish. So the problem is basically with those who choose to pick up arms against the government, and that is the PKK and its own organizations like the YPG in Syria. And that's why Turkey is determined to go ahead with the operation. This is the third cross-border operation in which Turkey will try to clear its border from these elements who are terrorists, launching a terrorist attack against Turkish people and Kurdish people in the southern parts of Turkey.
Yeah. So, Ahmed, you well know the concern U.S. and others about this Turkish operation east of the Euphrates. They say this would create a space for ISIS revival. Is that true?
It is not true. At the very beginning, Turkey vowed that it's ready to fight ISIS and Daesh with the help of the United States and any other power. They said to the ally in Washington that you cannot turn a blind eye on the terrorist attacks that is happening against Turkey by these elements, the YPG elements. So Daesh can be defeated, and Turkey succeeded to defeat Daesh at the very beginning of the rise of Daesh in Kobani, Ain al-Arab in Syria. And then the Washington or the Americans, they decided to choose the YPG as their ally to defeat Daesh, while Turkey was always asking them to try Turkey, and if they didn't succeed, then they can move to any other ally they want on the ground. But the problem is, again, the United States is not taking the sensitivity of this issue seriously. Till this moment, they understand that Turkey will go ahead with the operation regardless of any concerns of the United States. And Turkey understands the geopolitics, or especially now what's happening in the United States and the Trump's status to go ahead with the operation. It's a very good timing for Turkey to start and embark on the operation very soon, I believe.
Very well, Ahmed. We'll leave it there at that, but we do sincerely appreciate your analysis today. That was Ahmed Ali Olu speaking to us there from Turkey. Let's move on with the news for the moment. In Baghdad, 8 more protesters have died in clashes between protesters and security forces. The government has blamed what it calls malicious hands for that unrest, in which 109 people have died so far and 6,000 have been injured. The Interior Ministry says an investigation is underway to determine who was behind the violence. Interior Ministry spokesman said protesters have burned 51 public buildings and 8 political party headquarters. Iraq's Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani has urged protesters and security forces to end the violence. Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi has pledged to speak with the protesters without preconditions. Abdul Mahdi defended security forces, saying they only use force in extreme cases of self-defense. Well, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan will leave for China on a 3-day visit today to discuss regional issues and bilateral ties. During his visit, the Prime Minister will hold separate meetings with the Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang. The two countries will discuss expansion of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor projects. They will also deliberate implementation of Phase 2 of China-Pakistan Free Trade Agreement to boost trade ties. This will be Imran Khan's 3rd visit to China within a year. Well, with Indian-occupied Kashmir under a crushing lockdown and radio silence for the past 64 days, the Indian government has expressed total ignorance of the plight of Kashmiris, saying it has no information of any clampdown in the occupied valley. The Home Ministry issued the statement in response to the right to information request by activist Venkatesh Nayak. In its reply, the ministry said it has no information on the names and locations of thousands of arrested Kashmiris. The ministry said it has directed the query to occupied Kashmir, saying information might be available with the state government. Interestingly, the application cannot be forwarded to the valley's government, as the Indian Information Act is not applicable in the occupied valley. Responding, the activist said how officials could not have information about the valley when it is currently under presidential rule. In Indian Nagaland, rebel leader Teolengailing Moiva says New Delhi's annexation of occupied Kashmir is unacceptable. In an interview, Moiva said revocation of Kashmir's special status was a violation of past pacts and the history of the region. Rejecting New Delhi's decision, the rebel leader said the move is nothing short of betrayal. The National Socialist Council of Nagaland leader, Moiva, is pursuing a separate sovereign state for the Naga people. Time now for a short break. I'll be back, though, with plenty more news after that. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says any peace deal in Afghanistan should not favor foreigners. The Foreign Minister says Iran supports peace talks, taking everyone within the country on board. He said foreign powers should not exclude one or several groups from the process by exerting influence to serve their vested interests. Well, on the 18th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban say America has totally failed in its ambitions. In a statement, the group said that they have brought the U.S. down to its knees in the country. It said the only way to end the war is a complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from the shattered country. The statement said the group will fight U.S. forces for another 18 years unless their demands are met. Denouncing the presidential polls held last month, the Taliban said what it called the selected government has failed. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, a group of 11 key Taliban prisoners have been released in exchange for 3 Indian hostages. Well, to discuss that further, we're now joined by James Dorsey, who's a Singapore-based political analyst. James, as always, we appreciate you joining us here at Indus News. What do you make, James, of the Afghan Taliban's claim that America has failed in its ambitions in Afghanistan over the last 18 years?
The proof will be in the pudding, but essentially that is true. With other words, 18 years after the beginning of the war, the United States is currently negotiating its withdrawal from Afghanistan with the Taliban, the very group that it was overthrowing in 2001. And it's leaving behind a country in which, with enormous political and economic problems, in which it's very, at least probable or possible, that the Taliban will come back into government, and again, possibly as Afghanistan's sole rulers.
And then one wonders, what kind of an effect such statements may have on the talks between the U.S. and the Taliban.
I don't think that they're going to have much effect. I mean, I think they will be taken as par for the course and as expected. I think more fundamentally, there are lessons to be learned from all of this. First of all, and that's not exclusively American, we see that in other wars by other countries too, traditional militaries have the greatest difficulty in fighting non-state actors who employ asymmetric warfare. The other lesson I think one learns is that victory is not simply determined by whether or not one has succeeded militarily. Victory is secured if indeed you rebuild and reconstruct the country that has been basically devastated by war. And that's something that the Americans failed to do for both practical problems as well as the United States' continuous grappling with the notion of state building and nation building.
Well, James, we'll leave that for now. But of course, as always, we appreciate you putting that all into context for us. That was James Dorsey speaking to us from Singapore. Let's move on now to Portugal, where the centre-left Socialist Party has won Sunday's parliamentary elections. Prime Minister Antonio Costa's party took 106 seats in the 230-member parliament. The Socialists will need to put together a coalition because they were unable to win an outright majority in the House. Leaders of the left bloc and communists have backed Costa since the last election in 2015. Both say they are open to negotiations if the Socialists commit to improving the lives of the working class. Costa said he will continue working to build a united Europe.
We will never give up in the defense of a stronger Europe, more cohesive and more solidarity, because within Europe and with Europe, we will build our future.
Well, the opposition Social Democrat Party won 77 seats but lost their grip on 9 major previously constituencies. On to Tunisia now, where the moderate Ennahda party is leading with 18% of votes in Sunday's parliamentary election. Exit polls show the leading party's main rival, the Heart of Tunisia party, is at 16%. Both Ennahda and Heart of Tunisia have ruled out being part of any coalition with each other. Ennahda's projected vote share translates into only about 40 seats, with 109 needed to form a majority. The results hint at a deeply fractured future parliament. These are the country's third parliamentary polls after its successful transition to democracy following the 2011 revolution. Well, opposition parties have won Kosovo's general elections. Unofficial results show the center-left Vetëvendësia and center-right Democratic League have each won 25% of votes. President Hashim Thaçi's Democratic Party of Kosovo came third on 20%. With no one taking an absolute majority, the opposition camps will need to unite against the PDK to form a coalition government. On his victory, the Vetëvendësia leader and candidate for Prime Minister Albin Kurti said his party will fight corruption till the end.
With us in power, there will be no thieves in the government. There will be no thieves in the state institutions. In line with the rule of our law, thieves will be fought, investigated, prosecuted, and punished in our society, wherever they are.
Well, French President Emmanuel Macron has given British Prime Minister Boris Johnson a week to submit a final Brexit plan. In a telephone call, Johnson discussed his Brexit proposal and asked Macron's support for a deal with the EU. The French president urged Johnson to step up negotiations with the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. Brussels has dismissed the UK proposals tabled last week, calling them incomprehensive and impractical. Britain and the EU are due to resume talks today to find a new agreement ahead of a key EU summit on October 17th. But the Irish backstop continues to be a sticking point. Well, on to Rwanda, where security forces have killed 19 suspected terrorists after they allegedly killed 14 people near the Volcanoes National Park last week. Police say 5 terrorists were also arrested. The death toll from that attack was originally set at 8. The area has repeatedly been targeted by Rwandan rebels operating from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The last attack by rebels in this region occurred in December and resulted in the deaths of 2 Rwandan soldiers. Well, in southern Armenia, villagers are protesting against the construction of an open-cast gold mine, posing an ecological threat to the region. The government has approved the project despite environmental concerns and legal controversy. This report tells you more.
Since 2006, the offshore company Lydian has invested hundreds of millions to extract gold from the Amulsar Mountains. The range is thought to contain 40 tons of the precious metal. From a small Caucasus mountain nation, hundreds of activists gathered in the capital Yerevan, demanding an end to the venture. Villagers say gold mining will pollute drinking water and damage local tourist hotspots, thus affecting their livelihoods. The mining company dismisses villagers' fears as unsubstantiated, but local ecologists warn of their potential dangers.
Due to heavy metals, the bottom substrate, the chemical composition, the water morphology, and the hydrobiology of the river will change, resulting in unmanageable environmental consequences. The water ecosystem will be disrupted.
Environmental groups campaigning against the enterprise are unconvinced by the latest findings.
We are fighting for Armenia, for nature. We are against the mining companies that have come to enrich themselves at the expense of our country and our health. And we will never let that happen.
The frustrated villagers are raising questions about the safety and survival of the next generation. Should the government give go ahead?
Well, a rare pair of white lions has been born in the Jinan Wildlife Park in eastern China's Shandong province. It is the first successful breeding of white lions in that park. Born during China's National Day holiday, the cubs have been called National Day babies by zookeepers. White lions are a rare color mutation of the African lion. The worldwide population of white lions is currently less than 300. The park has a total of 3 adult white lions, 1 male and 2 females. Asian markets have traded mixed as investors ahead of a fresh round of U.S.-China trade negotiations later this week. Japan's Nikkei 225 fell marginally, while Shanghai stocks dipped almost 1%. South Korea's Kospi recovered with fractional gains after sliding earlier. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index lost over 1%. The Australian DAX shored up over 0.5% in gains, while London's FTSE traded over 0.5% higher. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. And with that, you're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here at Indus.